The first time I realized my parents had already chosen my brother over me, it wasn't during a fight or some dramatic family blow-up. It was quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable. I was 17, standing in our kitchen with a stack of college brochures in my hands, talking about scholarships and deadlines like my future mattered. My mom barely looked up from her phone. My dad nodded absently, then said, "That's nice, but let's not stress about money right now. We need to focus on your brother. His opportunity is bigger." Bigger. That word landed hard. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of burnt coffee, the way my brother sat at the table scrolling through his tablet like none of this concerned him. That was the moment I understood the rules of our family. I wasn't the priority. I was the background noise. From the outside, we looked fine. Suburban house, 2 cars, family dinners on Sundays when my parents felt like pretending. But inside, everything revolved around my brother, Mark. His sports camps, his private tutors, his dream college. If he wanted something, my parents found a way. If I needed something, I was told to be patient, to be grateful, to understand that sacrifices had to be made. Funny how those sacrifices were never his. By the time I turned 18, they had emptied the savings account my grandparents had started for both of us. Every last dollar went to Mark's prep school and networking opportunities. When I asked about my share, my mom smiled tightly and said, "You're strong. You'll figure it out." So I did. I worked 2 jobs while finishing school. I learned how to budget because no one else would do it for me. I learned how to swallow disappointment without letting it show, because every time I brought it up, I was accused of being jealous or dramatic. Meanwhile, Mark got a brand new car for his graduation. I got a handshake and a reminder to move my things out of my room because he needed the space when he came home on breaks. That was the pattern. Give him everything. Give me explanations. What really changed things, though, was the night my dad sat me down and told me they'd taken out a second mortgage. Not for an emergency, not for the house, for Mark's next step. An overseas program that cost more than my yearly income. "It's an investment," my dad said, eyes shining with pride. "One day he'll take care of all of us." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. When I realized it wasn't, something inside me finally went quiet. Not angry, not sad, just done. I stopped asking for anything after that. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to compete for attention I was never going to win. I focused on building my own life, piece by piece, without their help. I moved into a tiny apartment with thin walls and a leaky faucet. I worked late nights and early mornings. I taught myself skills they never thought were worth paying for. Every small win felt huge because it was mine. And the whole time, my parents barely noticed. As long as Mark was shining, everything else was irrelevant. Years passed. I grew up. I built stability. My parents aged into a version of themselves that assumed I'd always be there in the background, quietly handling my own problems while they poured everything into my brother's. They called when they needed favors. They expected support when things went wrong. They never once asked how I was doing unless it somehow connected back to him, and I let it slide. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd learned that confronting them only led to excuses and guilt trips. Then the phone call came. My mom's voice was tight, rehearsed. Mark had messed up, big time. A failed business venture, bad decisions, money gone. Suddenly, the people who had given him everything had nothing left to give. And that's when they looked at me, not as a daughter, as a backup plan, as the responsible one. As the child who owed the family because I'd managed to survive without them. That was the moment I realized they hadn't just chosen my brother over me. They had bet everything on him, and now that bet had failed. They expected me to pay the price. They thought I'd step in quietly, the way I always had, and clean up the mess. What they didn't know was that, while they were busy giving him everything, I had been building something they couldn't touch. And I was done pretending that love meant letting myself be drained dry. When my parents finally came to see me in person, they didn't even pretend it was a social visit. They showed up together, sitting stiffly on my couch like guests waiting for bad news at a hospital. My mom kept smoothing the sleeve of her coat. My dad stared at the framed certificate on my wall, the one from a program I'd completed years earlier, as if he was trying to calculate what it was worth. No hugs. No, we've missed you. Just tension hanging thick in the room. We need to talk, my dad said, like he was calling a meeting at work. I nodded. I already knew what was coming. Mark had burned through the last of their money, and reality had finally caught up with them. My mom sighed dramatically. You know, we've always wanted what's best for you and your brother, she began, the same line she'd used my whole life whenever she was about to justify something unfair. But families help each other when times are tough. I waited. Silence has a way of making people reveal themselves. Mark needs help getting back on his feet, my dad said. Just temporarily. We thought maybe you could contribute. You've always been so responsible. There it was, not a question, an expectation, like my stability existed for their convenience. I felt something sharp and clear cut through the fog I'd carried for years. Contribute how? I asked. My mom leaned forward, eyes bright with hope. A loan, or maybe you could co-sign something, or help us cover some expenses until he finds his footing again. She smiled, like this was a reasonable ask, like they hadn't already spent decades choosing him over me. I thought about the nights I'd skipped meals so I could afford rent, the times I'd watched Mark open expensive gifts while I calculated bus fare in my head. The way they'd told me to be strong, to figure it out, to understand. And now they wanted me to understand again. I stood up slowly. So let me get this straight, I said. You gave him everything, and now that there's nothing left, you want me to fix it. My dad frowned. That's not fair. I laughed, a short sound that surprised even me. Neither was emptying our savings for him. Neither was telling me my future could wait. Neither was treating me like a spare part. My mom's face hardened. You're being bitter, she snapped. This isn't about the past. It is for me, I said calmly, because the past explains why I'm saying no. The word hung in the air like a dropped plate. No, simple, final. My mom's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am, I said. I'm not giving Mark money. I'm not co-signing anything. I'm not sacrificing my stability so you can keep pretending nothing went wrong. My dad's voice rose. After everything we've done for you? I met his gaze. You taught me to survive without you. That's what you did for me. They left angry, hurt, accusing me of turning my back on family. For a few days, the guilt crept in, the old familiar voice telling me I was selfish, ungrateful, cruel. Then the calls started. First my mom, crying, talking about stress and sleepless nights. Then my dad, colder, hinting at how this would look to the rest of the family. When that didn't work, Mark reached out. His message was short. Didn't think you'd be like this. That one hurt more than I expected. Not because he was right, but because he had never once thought about what it cost me to always be the one who adjusted. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the number. For the first time, I chose peace over proximity. Weeks passed. I heard through relatives that things were bad. My parents had downsized. Mark was bouncing between friends' couches. And somehow I was the villain in all their stories. The ungrateful daughter who refused to help. The one who forgot where she came from. I let them talk. I was done defending myself. The real reality check came later, when my parents tried to show up unannounced at my place, demanding to talk things through as a family. I didn't let them in. I stood behind the closed door and told them calmly that if they kept pushing, I'd take steps to protect myself legally. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Boundaries, I'd learned, only work when you enforce them. That was the moment it finally sank in for them. I wasn't the backup plan anymore. I wasn't the quiet child who would absorb the damage so they didn't have to face their mistakes. I had built a life without their help, and I wasn't going to burn it down to save the illusion they'd been living in for years. While they were busy giving everything to my brother, I had learned the value of saying no. And that lesson was worth more than anything they had ever spent on him. After that, something unexpected happened. The noise faded. The constant tension I'd carried since childhood, the background anxiety of waiting for the next request or disappointment, slowly loosened its grip. My parents stopped calling once they realized tears and threats wouldn't work. Mark didn't reach out again. The silence felt strange at first, like standing in a room after a loud machine finally shuts off. But then it felt peaceful. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Mornings without dread. Evenings where my phone didn't make my stomach drop. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to earn a kind of love that was always conditional. Letting go wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. And it was powerful. Months later, I ran into my aunt at a family gathering I almost didn't attend. She pulled me aside, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Your parents are struggling," she said. "They don't understand why you've shut them out." I nodded politely. I didn't explain. People who benefit from your silence rarely understand your boundaries. What I did understand was this. My parents hadn't just given everything to my brother. They'd taken something from me: time, trust, the sense that I mattered equally. And when I finally stopped offering myself up as the solution to their mistakes, they were forced to face a truth they'd avoided for years. Favoritism isn't harmless. It doesn't disappear when kids grow up. It compounds. It shapes lives. I didn't cut them off out of spite. I cut them off out of self-respect. There's a difference. One burns, the other builds. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how things could have been. A version of us where support wasn't a competition, where love didn't come with a price tag, but I don't linger there. That version was never real. What's real is the life I built when I stopped waiting for permission to matter. I hear through distant channels that Mark is still struggling. I don't wish him harm. I also don't rush in to save him. That's another hard truth people don't like to hear. Helping someone who's never been allowed to face consequences doesn't actually help them. It just delays the lesson. My parents thought protecting him meant giving him everything. All it really did was teach him that someone else would always clean up the mess. As for me, I learned the opposite. I learned that being overlooked can either break you or sharpen you. I learned that self-reliance isn't cold, it's clarifying. And I learned that sometimes the strongest message you can send isn't an argument or a speech. It's walking away and letting reality speak for you. The reality check I gave my parents wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was final. It was the moment they realized I was no longer the child they could ignore until they needed something. I was an adult with limits, values, and a life I refused to sacrifice for their comfort. If you're listening to this and it feels familiar, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me earlier. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. Love that demands self-destruction isn't love. It's control wearing a familiar face. My parents gave everything to my brother. Money, time, excuses. I gave myself something they never did: priority. And once I did that, everything changed.